Hi everyone! Welcome to the Gender Identity and Attraction lesson of Parent Circles. My name is Trent and I am a community health educator for Planned Parenthood of Greater Ohio. I use he, him, his, and they, them, theirs pronouns. We're going to be covering a lot of content in this video. Remember, you can watch this video as many times as you want to. If you want, you can also take a look at the transcript of this recording. It's linked in the description below. When we get to the part on definitions, it may be helpful for you to look at the transcript and follow along. Today, we are discussing gender identity and attraction. This can be a really intense and personal topic for some folks. Practice self-care. Feel free to take the space you need, feel how you feel, take a break, whatever you need to do. One of the ideas we're going to be exploring today is the sex, sexuality, and gender profile. This is not the only way to think about these ideas. In fact, lots of cultures around the world have very different ideas about gender, sex, and sexuality look and work. One of the ways we represent the sex, sexuality, and gender profile is through the gender unicorn model. It shows a lot of different things happening, but don't worry, we're going to keep coming back to it piece by piece and explain what everything is. One of the first things we're going to talk about are our bodies. Everyone has a body, and each body is different. One of the first things I'd like to talk about when it comes to bodies is that people often have a sex assigned at birth. This means that when someone is born, someone usually assigns them an official term, like male or female, and that goes on their birth certificate. However, this tradition assumes that there are only two options. That's not how things work in reality. This is actually a false social binary. When someone is talking about a social binary, they are talking about how in a society or culture, people assume there are only two choices. Often, these are false binaries, meaning that while people assume there are only two choices, there are really many more. An example of an option outside of the false binary of sex assigned at birth are people who are intersex. Approximately 2% of the world's population is intersex. That's about the same amount of people who naturally have red hair, or the same amount of people who naturally have green eyes. Please pause the video here and watch this video from Pop and Ollie to learn more about intersex people. When you are finished, please come back and finish this video. I'll pause here for a moment so you can scroll down to the description, click on the link, and check it out. Now let's talk about medically accurate terminology and what it means. Simply put, it means that when I'm talking about things, I try to use the most up-to-date and scientific names. This helps to avoid confusion that sometimes happens when people use slang words. It's also good to know the medically accurate terms for things, because if you ever talk with a doctor, they might be more familiar with the medically accurate terms as opposed to the slang terms. When we say male or female, we are leaving out a lot of information about a person's body and their experiences. Instead, we often use phrases like a person with a vagina or penis and the typically related parts. This is to avoid confusion by clarifying that I am talking about a person with a specific type of body. It's also important to know that lots of people associate male and female with specific genders, and not everyone with a penis identifies as male, and not everyone with a vulva identifies as female. Choosing different words helps us to be more inclusive of all people. Some people might be uncomfortable using words like penis, vulva, testicles, or vagina. It's okay to feel uncomfortable, but it's important to remember that giving young people the scientific names for their body parts helps them to express themselves to healthcare professionals if something is wrong, have open and honest conversations about their body with their caring adults, and in cases where they may be experiencing physical harm, they are able to express where that harm is occurring. Our anatomy and biology are part of our sex, sexuality, and gender profiles. It's not just about the shape of our bodies, though. It's also about the internal parts of our bodies, too. That's why when we're using the gender unicorn to explain gender, it's about the whole body and not just our DNA or the shape of our genitals. Now we're going to talk about gender. Gender is not the same as sex assigned at birth. Sometimes there may be a relationship between them, but not always. Gender is made up of a couple different parts: identity and expression. Everyone has an identity, and everyone expresses their identity. As we move into the next slides and we look at the visual representations of each aspect of identity, it's important to remember that all of these categories are very fluid. Someone can identify very strongly with one particular identity, and the next day it shifts for them. Some people assume that gender looks like boy and girl, only, and most of the time they are basing that off of the male and female idea we just talked about. Some people say that gender is a line with boy on one end and girl on the other, but that leaves out a lot of people like non-binary people, agender people, and genderqueer people. We'll talk about what those terms mean in just a little bit. Actually, gender looks more like this wheel with lots of colors and options. One important thing to note is that there are not opposites in gender. For a long time, we've been told that male and female or man and woman are opposites of each other, but that's not true. They are just different points on a spectrum. Gender identity is the internal understanding and experience of our own gender. Each person's experience with their gender identity is unique and personal. Some questions someone can ask while they are exploring their gender identity are, how do I experience my gender? How do I feel in relation to the sex I was assigned at birth? And what does gender mean to me? Let's take a look at the spectrum on the right side of the slide. Your identity can fall anywhere on and around the spectrum. It can even fall in multiple points or change from day to day. The words on the spectrum are some of the most common ways people identify in the US, but there are many other possibilities. We'll define exactly what these terms mean a little later in the video. When we're using the gender unicorn model to explain what gender identity is, we focus on the thought bubble, because it's our own thoughts and feelings about who we are. Something that not a lot of people know about are things called pronouns. A pronoun is a word that you use in place of someone's name while you're talking about them. For example, instead of saying, that is Trent's chair, a person might say, that is his chair, or that is their chair. People share pronouns or ask others to share pronouns in order to avoid making assumptions about gender identity. If someone tells you their pronouns, it is important to be respectful and not misgender them. If someone told us their name, we wouldn't refuse to use it. Pronouns are no different. If you don't know someone's pronouns, it's best to ask or to use neutral pronouns until you know what they prefer. The most common neutral pronouns are they, them, theirs, but there are many more. One thing to keep in mind is that some people use multiple pronouns, like me. At this point in my life, I use he, him, his, and they, them, theirs pronouns. Some other people would prefer to just use their names all the time. If you want to know someone else's pronouns, one communication strategy you can use is giving your own pronouns first. For example, hi, my name is Trent, and I use he, him, his, and they, them, theirs pronouns. What's your name, and how can I refer to you? Another thing I'd like to talk about is misgendering. Misgendering is when someone uses a name or pronouns for themselves that they don't use for themselves. Whether on purpose or on accident, it's important to realize that calling someone by a name or pronoun that they don't use or don't use anymore might make them feel bad, disrespected, or even unsafe. If someone makes a mistake, correcting themselves and moving on right away is the best course of action. There's no need to keep drawing attention to the mistake. The next part of the profile I'd like to talk about is gender expression. Gender identity and gender expression are different things. Gender expression is how we choose to express our gender. Some examples of this are our haircuts, clothing, voice and body characteristics, and behavior. Some questions someone can ask while they are exploring their gender expression are, how do I like to present my gender? In an ideal situation, how would I want to express my gender? What aspects of gender expression make me feel happy and authentically myself? What aspects of gender expression make me feel sad and not like myself? Some people may have heard the term gender dysphoria, and maybe a few less people have heard of gender euphoria. Gender dysphoria is something that some people, regardless of gender identity, may experience if they feel their identity and expression or their body is out of line with their gender. Sometimes this can just be uncomfortable, but sometimes it can also really take a serious toll on someone's mental health. Gender euphoria is kind of the opposite. It happens when someone feels very confident and connected to their gender identity and expression. If you've ever put on your most favorite outfit, had a great hair day, and just been really happy with your appearance, that's gender euphoria, feeling authentically happy with your gender and expression. Let's talk about some of the terms on the spectrum now. These words often have very different meanings from person to person, so I can only give very basic definitions. Masculine, masc, or butch refers to characteristics that are often associated with men in our culture. A person does not have to be a man to express themselves in these ways, and not all men express themselves in these ways. Feminine or femme refers to characteristics that are often associated with women in our culture. Again, anyone regardless of gender can express themselves in feminine ways. Androgynous is one of the most ambiguous in terms of definitions. For the purposes of this lesson, we'll define it as expressing the characteristics of masculinity and femininity at the same time. This can take many different forms and again can be expressed by a person of any gender identity. Genderless is also ambiguous in terms of definition. For the purposes of this lesson, we'll define it as expressing no particular gender. Gender expression is a little tricky in this way because while a person may express themselves in a genderless way, many people attempt to attribute a gender to someone regardless of their expression. On the unicorn, we are showing that clothes are a big part of gender expression. Another way the unicorn is expressing their gender is through their hairstyle. The next topic we're going to be talking about is attraction. Just like how gender has a few parts, attraction also has a few parts. This slide has the flags of a lot of different attraction and identity pride. Do you recognize any of them? When we talk about attraction, a lot of people used to think of it like one man is attracted to one woman. Again, this comes from this false social binary. In recent years, we've opened up a little bit to the idea that men can also be attracted to men, and women can also be attracted to women. However, these are only a few of the options. Actually, attraction has a lot of different options and possibilities, and that's what we're going to talk about next. The first element of attraction we're going to be talking about is the element of sexual attraction. This one is maybe the one most people talk about, and the one that is most often shown in a lot of TV shows and movies. Some questions someone can ask while exploring sexual attraction: who am I interested in being sexually intimate with? Who do I find physically attractive? How often do I experience feelings of sexual or physical attraction? Am I interested in being sexually intimate with others? The last two questions are really interesting to me because some people experience sexual attraction more or less often than other people. Some people don't experience sexual attraction at all. Sometimes these people refer to themselves as asexual or ace for short. Depending on how often they experience sexual attraction or what specific things have to happen for them to experience sexual attraction, they might refer to themselves as gray sexual or demisexual. All three of these things are on a spectrum, and so the words often have really different meanings from person to person. Note the spectrum on the right side of the slide. You can see in the center that the category is labeled as having no sexual attraction. This relates to the identity of asexual. The next element we're going to talk about is romantic attraction. This is different and separate from sexual attraction. Sometimes people's romantic attraction and sexual attraction line up. For example, someone can be romantically and sexually attracted to men, but they may also be sexually but not romantically attracted to women. Some questions someone can ask while exploring their romantic attraction are: have I ever had a crush on someone before? Who have I had crushes on? Who do I want to experience romantic behaviors with? Who do I want to experience romantic relationships with? The next element we're going to talk about is emotional attraction. This is different and separate from sexual and romantic attraction, but again, sometimes it can line up for someone. Some examples of emotional attraction are wanting to become best friends with someone or feeling emotionally drawn to someone based on their personality. Attraction doesn't always have to come with what is often considered a romantic relationship. If someone is emotionally attracted to someone, they may not necessarily want to be in a romantic relationship with that person, but they still may want to be closer with them. The last element of attraction we're going to be talking about today is intellectual attraction. This one doesn't have a chart to go along with it because there hasn't been as much recognition for this kind of attraction yet. Just like with the other forms of attraction, it is different and separate from all the others, but sometimes they may line up for each individual person. Intellectual attraction is the desire to connect with others on an intellectual level. Some examples include wanting to have in-depth conversations about a specific topic with someone, or feeling drawn to someone based on their intellect. Some questions someone can ask while exploring their intellectual attraction: who do I have strong desires to have intellectual conversations with? Who do I feel an intellectual bond towards? Who do I want to get to know better? When it comes to the unicorn model, the reason there is more than one heart is that many people experience multiple forms of attraction, sometimes all four. Sometimes the attractions work separate from each other, sometimes they work when they all line up to a specific kind of person. It's important to keep in mind that attraction is not the only requirement for a healthy relationship. The last thing I want to talk about before we wrap up our unicorn model of the sex, sexuality, and gender profile is the difference between identity and behavior. Earlier, when we defined identity, we talked about how it was our internal understanding of ourselves and how expression was different from that. I think the best way I can explain this is to ask some questions for you to think about. If someone identifies as a gay man and has sex with a woman, are they still gay? Why or why not? If someone is straight and they are attracted to a person who is non-binary, are they still straight? Why or why not? Earlier, we also talked about words and how important words are to people, and that people should have the right to choose the words they use for themselves and be called by those words. It's the same thing. Regardless of behaviors, if they identify one way, it's not up to us to tell them what their identity is. So this is the full unicorn model of the sex, sexuality, and gender profile. There's a lot of different parts to it, but now you know what those parts are. Some people use the unicorn model differently. We use it here to give a physical representation of different gender and attraction concepts. Sometimes it's easier to remember what everything is if it's all laid out like this. For this part of the video, you may want to look at the transcript, especially if you learn best through reading instead of listening. I'm going to be defining a lot of words, and it may be best if you follow along while I talk about them. You might notice that we didn't use a lot of words before like bisexual, straight, pansexual, non-binary, or trans. That was intentional. One of the theories that people who create theories about attraction and identity have is that sometimes just having words with strict definitions is not helpful. It can make people feel boxed in, and that if they pick a word, they have to stick to that word forever. That's not true. So what we've tried to do is give people a framework for looking at their own experiences without words. However, words are often really important to people. They help when it comes to building communities and when making laws to protect those communities. The hard part about that, though, is that if someone seems to be outside of a specific community, they may have a hard time socially using a word they feel describes them, or accessing legal protections given to that community. Here are some words and commonly accepted definitions you might come across while doing advocacy or while interacting with the queer community. Like I've said before, these definitions might change, or these words might fall out of use, and that's totally okay. Cis or cisgender is when someone who is assigned male or female at birth identifies with the gender culturally associated with their anatomy, for example, a person with a penis identifying as a man. Trans or transgender means that someone doesn't identify with the sex they were assigned at birth. Like we talked about before, gender is not a point A to point B spectrum. A trans person doesn't need to be assigned male at birth and then fully and completely identify as a woman in order to be trans. Many non-binary people consider themselves to be trans as well. Pan or pangender refers to someone who, in terms of gender, identifies with all or a large number of genders. In terms of attraction, pansexual or panromantic, they may be attracted to people of all genders, but attraction towards someone for them is the same regardless of that person's gender. Bi or bigender refers to someone who, in terms of gender, identifies with two or more genders. In terms of bisexuality or biromantic attraction, the attraction they experience could be to two or more genders where gender is a factor within the attraction, and can include a preference for one gender over another, or attraction that feels different when it is directed at a specific gender. Ace is an umbrella term to describe a lot of experiences. Agender refers to someone who does not identify with a gender. In terms of someone who identifies as asexual or aromantic, they do not experience sexual or romantic attraction respectively. Ace is a spectrum and is sometimes referred to as demi or gray. Some of the degrees on the spectrum are experiencing no attraction to others, experiencing some degree of attraction to others only under very specific conditions such as a close emotional bond or feeling intellectual stimulation. Sometimes people who are on the ace, demi, or gray spectrums have sex with their partner or partners. It is their choice to do so, and doesn't make them any less ace, demi, or gray if that is how they identify. Gay can be both an individual identity and an umbrella term for various people in the LGBTQ+ or queer communities. Most commonly, it is used to refer to men who are sexually and romantically attracted to other men. Lesbian most commonly refers to a woman who is sexually and romantically attracted to other women. Straight is a term that was created and normalized under the idea that there are two and only two genders, which, as we have learned, is both untrue and can sometimes be harmful for people. That being said, it is still used today, typically but not always, to describe a man who is attracted to women, and only women, and a woman who is attracted to men and only men. Non-binary is an umbrella term and refers to people whose gender is outside of the false binary genders. Some additional terms that fall under the umbrella of non-binary are people who are agender, genderqueer, queer, gender fluid. Queer is a term that has recently become more commonplace. It is used in several ways. One of those ways is as an umbrella term to replace LGBTQ+. Some people feel that queer is inclusive of all identities that are not cis and/or not straight. Some people use it as a way to describe their identity, both in gender and in attraction. Some can identify as queer or genderqueer in terms of gender. This has various meanings due to the intentionally ambiguous nature of the word. Queer can also be used to describe someone in terms of attraction, again with various meanings due to the ambiguity of the word. Some people use it to represent the fluidity of their identity. It should be noted that the history of the word is rather storied, with some people having experiences with it only as a slur. A large portion of the LGBTQ+ and queer communities have reclaimed this word, and it is used more and more frequently as a result. Because of that reason, it is on the outdated words list with a question mark next to it, but also on the standalone words list. It is important to use the words that people use for themselves or explicitly tell someone to use for them. LGBTQ+ is an acronym that is meant to encompass all gender identities and sexual orientations that are not straight and/or cis. Questioning refers to someone who is exploring their gender or attractions. Heteronormative is society's expectation that everyone is straight and/or cisgender, and so the way we talk, think, and act is kind of built on that idea. One example of this would be men's and women's bathrooms. We know that there are more genders, so instead of having just public bathrooms or bathrooms for every single gender, we only have two. Homosexual is an outdated and widely considered offensive word by people in the LGBTQ+ and queer communities, due to its use as a mental health diagnosis when LGBTQ+ and queer people were seen as mentally ill. We know definitively that that is not true, and so the term has fallen out of use. Transsexual is an outdated and widely considered offensive word by people in the LGBTQ+ and queer communities, partly due to its use as a mental health diagnosis similar to homosexual, but also because it originally referred to someone who had or was seeking gender-affirming surgery. Today we use the word trans to be inclusive of all people whose gender identity does not match their sex assigned at birth, regardless of whether or not they are seeking medical interventions in affirming their gender identity. Transvestite is an outdated and widely considered offensive word by people in the LGBTQ+ and queer communities. Again, due to its history related to mental health, but because its definition was a person who dressed in clothes that did not correspond to societal expectations of what a person with their sex assigned at birth should wear. Example, a person who was assigned female at birth wearing clothes socioculturally deemed appropriate only for men. This is an upholding of the false binary, and today we use terms like trans to describe those who identify and express themselves as a gender that does not correlate with their sex assigned at birth. There is also something called drag, where someone does performances related to gender and creates a persona that is an exaggerated caricature of a specific gender, typically men or women. They may use terms like drag king or queen to describe themselves. Drag in general is a space where a lot of people experiment with gender and sometimes discover things about their own identity or preferred presentation due to their participation in drag. One term you might be familiar with already is coming out. Coming out is when a person who is queer or questioning chooses to disclose their identity to someone else. A common misconception is that someone only comes out once. In reality, people who are queer, because we live in a society where most people assume that everyone is straight and/or cisgender, have to come out again and again throughout their lives if they choose that path. If someone comes out to you, remember that this is a very personal and potentially vulnerable experience for them. Reacting with positivity can help them feel more comfortable coming out to more people. One of the biggest factors people should think about when considering coming out is safety and support. If things go great and people are supportive and welcoming, that's awesome, and it does happen. But sometimes things don't go as well, and so safety planning is essential, even if you're pretty sure the outcome will be good. Coming out is different for everyone. Some people do it all the time through the things that they wear or what they say, from wearing a shirt that says proud bisexual to casually referring to their romantic and/or sexual partner in conversation. Some people choose not to share that part of their life with folks, and that's okay too. Some people just tell a few people that are close to them. The important thing to remember is that coming out is a personal choice. You should never, ever disclose someone else's sexuality or gender without their explicit permission. Not only is it a huge violation of their privacy and their autonomy in controlling what happens in their life, but it may also put them in an unsafe situation. Disclosing someone else's sexuality is referred to as outing or being outed. I want to thank the Trevor Project for allowing us to use their materials in creating this video. They are an awesome organization that is dedicated to suicide prevention and crisis intervention for queer youth. They recognize that rates of suicide are higher among queer youth due to the additional pressures they face living in a homophobic and heteronormative society. They do everything they can to prevent that avoidable loss of life. I definitely encourage you to check out their website if you have time. They have tons of great resources available. They even have a guide to coming out that you can look at. This is a great resource for improving your communication skills and for directing people to if they have questions about coming out. Speaking of resources, if you want more information about gender, sex, and/or sexuality, here are some great websites with more information. Please check them out if you have the chance to. We'll link all of these awesome websites and resources in the description below. Thank you so much for your time, and thanks for circling up. Bye!